Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Holmes Field Advantage podcast. I'm your host, Wesley Holmes, and like usual, we have a special podcast episode coming here today. We have a special guest, Mark Neely of ESPN. He'll be our guest of the week. That's coming up in just a minute or so. After that, we'll have everyone's favorite SOS segment, that's Sports on the Spectrum, where I bring to you a sports story that the big networks won't cover. It covers the extremities, the wild stories that you hear around a campfire. We're going to talk about that after Mark's appearance on the show, and then, of course, my predictions of the week, where I'll tell you guys exactly what's going to happen, who's going to win, and by how much. But first, let's dive into our guest of the week. Welcome into the guest of the week segment for the Holmes Field Advantage podcast. Today, I'm joined by Mark Neely, play-by-play broadcaster of ESPN. Mark, thanks so much for coming on the show. It's great to have you here. We kind of talked off air a little bit. You wanted to go into some college basketball, some college baseball. First, I wanted to get your thoughts on this past March Madness and basketball season.
Yeah, I think Michigan was kind of overlooked by a number of prognosticators. I don't think Big Ten people did. They knew how good Michigan was. Those of us in the broadcasting business, we knew how much money that Michigan had put into that program and how they had used the transfer portal, and that the pieces really seemed to come together well for Dustin May. I do have, and for the past 15 years, I've done mainly Big 12 men's basketball, and it was disappointing in many ways for the Big 12. I mean, the Arizona showing against Michigan was obviously not good for the conference, but Arizona had been tremendous, and they were the pick for a lot of people to win it
Right.
all, and they had the talent to do so. I don't think that lopsided score against Michigan really reflected Arizona and their season, but Michigan was certainly the better team. And I just am always impressed. Whatever you think of Danny Hurley of
Right.
UConn, I mean, they always find a way, even though they always have a very talented roster. And obviously, Hurley's an
Right.
outstanding coach, having won a couple of titles. But I think a lot of people when the tournament started didn't think that UConn would had a chance to make it to the final game. And if they hit a few more of those threes, then they might have snuck up and won another title.
That's right. They definitely had a chance there at the end. So
Yeah.
obviously, Michigan, like you talked about, you weren't totally surprised by you and some of the other broadcasters in the business. But looking ahead to next year, it's already early, obviously. But who
Yeah.
could be the next Michigan? Who's that team that maybe the average fan isn't
Yeah.
looking at? Who are they not thinking about?
Wesley, if we'd had this conversation 5 to 10 years ago, it would have been easier to do because you knew for the most part what teams had coming back.
Right.
It's a totally different landscape now. And, the transfer portal flies
Right.
quickly. And it was interesting to watch from a Big 12 perspective with Bill Self, who made, I wouldn't call it an innocuous comment after they got knocked out on the first weekend again, about how he was going to take a little bit of time to, talk with his family, consider his
Right.
health, if he would come back to Kansas. And that window that between then and when he made his decision to come back was only about a week and a half, whatever it was. But even in that 8 or 9 days, Kansas starts losing Flory Badunga. He goes to Louisville. That process didn't complete itself till after Bill's announcement. But I mean, you can't sleep now with the transfer portal, man. It always is
Right.
going. Quite frankly, Wesley, there are no rules right now. I mean, technically, there's supposed to be some rules, but there aren't, and players are tampered with
Mhm.
all the time. It goes on during the season, and it's a different world. So it's hard for me to predict. I mean, I'll use Kansas as an example, man. This is a team that since they won the national championship, however a handful of years ago, they haven't made it out of the first weekend in the NCAA tournament. And now they basically have a completely different roster to put together for next year in what has already been a Big 12 that for almost 2 decades, Kansas was going to win the regular season every year. You assumed that's long gone. They're kind of a upper tier Big 12 to sometimes 5, 6 in that conference. With the way Texas Tech has gone with Grant McCaslin, obviously with Houston coming in, it's so challenging. So hard for me to say, but I would expect the usual suspects. Duke's always going to be Duke. They never really seem to miss a beat. I mean, the way they lost in their season was an absolute gut punch. I mean, without that final possession, maybe they win the national title. So it would have been interesting to see if if they had made it to the final game, what would have happened. So hard for me to say, but again,
Right.
there's always a handful of programs, kind of the blue bloods that you expect. But Kansas is the one I'm watching because they're behind right now, and that's unusual for a program like the Jayhawks.
And especially for just a legendary coach like Bill Self,
Yeah,
obviously going to be in the Hall of Fame one day, without a doubt. You mentioned the transfer portal. So after the national championship, the 15-day period where you could enter the portal, it ends today, April 21st. Is there any team that you kind of know that's been benefited by the portal or really heard like who's leaving and who's gaining from this portal window?
yeah, it happens so fast, and I get so absorbed after I get out of college basketball. I did some of the NCAA women's tournament for ESPN. So when that finished, that basically concluded my basketball season, and I shift to softball and
Right.
NCAA college baseball. So I don't keep a hard pulse on it, and quite frankly, it's really hard to do unless that's kind of your focus.
Right.
Things happen so quickly, and the names come and go, and there are a lot of names from those mid tier teams that maybe people don't know a ton about that can make an impact at those levels that quite frankly a lot of us don't know much about. But um, it's interesting to watch the portal. I mean,
Mhm.
I keep a little bit of a pulse on it. I'm like, oh yeah, okay. Floyd Badunga going to Louisville to me was big. I mean, I'm like, he was the best player in the portal, I thought. And for somebody like Kansas to lose him
Mhm.
says a lot because Wesley, if even you just go back a few years, you never really saw the really top programs lose players like that. That's happening now. So
Right.
it's obviously just a situation of players being mercenaries in many ways. It's like,
Right.
this is the amount of money I want, and you'll see if schools are willing to meet that. And from what I have seen, I mean, schools are. If anything, the money spent on rosters for sports outside of football. I mean, football is always going to be number one. Continues to go up. Men's basketball is kind of pushing that as well.
Right, and you mentioned a few years ago we would never see a program like Kansas
Yeah.
losing these big players, and that's obviously across all sports. We're seeing players they're chasing more after the money, the
Oh yeah.
recognition. They're getting more playing time. A big example is Justice Haynes. He was a running back
Hmm.
at Alabama just a few seasons ago. Transferred over, had a really great year. Michigan. There was Heisman talk for him for a little bit. He ends up transferring to Georgia Tech in this offseason, but he's getting paid the most he's ever been. But he's also no shade at Georgia Tech at the lowest program he's been at. And I just
Yeah.
think that do you think that's more of a negative thing for college sports? Is this a positive thing? It gives us a lot to talk about in the offseason.
It does, Wesley. And is it a positive thing? No. There do need to be some kind of restrictions, and I think it will, and probably already has started to affect the fan base's interest in their teams. I mean, when it changes completely year to year, eventually that's going to catch up with college athletics. People do not want to see 27 and 28-year-old players playing college that are in their sixth and seventh year. There have to be some kind of guardrails here. There has been talk about instituting those, and I think the most rational ones are, maybe you get one time to transfer. You come in, you're with a school, and one more time you can make a change if you want to make a money grab at that point. But you can't we can't have, and there are a bunch of these players out there right now, Wesley, that have played at five different schools in 5 years, and sometimes it's a crazy six if they get a medical red shirt. So
Right.
I think that's what has to be addressed. I don't have the answer. They've asked Congress,
Mhm.
how are we going to get this done? Well, Congress isn't the answer. They get so little done nowadays
Right.
anyway. It's going to have to be up to the people that are looked up to in college athletics to say, okay, do we name a commissioner or whatever it is, but let's put some guardrails in here because right now it's just chaos.
Right. I was talking to Tim Pernetti. He's the commissioner of the American Conference. He said
Yeah.
the cap's not really a cap. There is
Oh,
technically a cap on the NIL business, but when you have all these boosters, all these extra funders that can just pour the money on top, that's where the whole thing just gets bizarre. Right.
it does. And like you said, there are technically some rules, but they're not enforced. And even when the NCAA came out and said, okay, with NIL, we're going to look at every NIL that comes in from all these schools to make sure they're legitimate, that it's a legitimate ad campaign or whatever it is. Well, the numbers are just too overwhelming. The NCAA doesn't have that many employees to
Right.
really do their due diligence on that. And there are many ways to circumvent that. And it doesn't take long for schools to figure out how to do that.
Right. So you mentioned kind of moving on from college basketball to the college baseball season.
Mhm.
Obviously, the last couple of years, really the past decade or so, the SEC has kind of dominated college baseball. Do you think it's their year again this year, or is it turned for somebody else? Obviously, UCLA, really good. North Carolina.
Yeah, I mean, you just look at the last poll, and obviously UCLA, even though their winning streak ended a while back, I mean, they're still the number one team. Chalowski looks like he's going to be the first overall pick, and you got two ACC teams behind them in North Carolina and Georgia Tech who have been playing, with the way the schedule works out right now. I mean, Texas, who's only been in the SEC for a short time, right now, them in Georgia, Texas A&M. I mean, the SEC certainly you can't look past them. My next assignments is college baseball this Thursday and Friday, and it's Arkansas at Mizzou. Now, obviously, that would seem to be pretty one-sided, and it might be. But Arkansas is a team, that always seems to be on the cusp, but they've been getting knocked down. I mean, they got pretty high in the polls a few weeks back, and they've continued to drop. They stayed in the top 25, but they've got a wealth of talent, man. And, at least a handful of players are going to go in the MLB draft. So there's always a lot of talent in the SEC. I mean, I don't think it's ever wise to say, oh, an SEC team's not gonna win it. They might not, but they're going to certainly have their number of representatives in Omaha at the end.
There any teams that have kind of surprised you going into this year where I didn't think this team would be near where they're at right now?
You know, I it it's I had the NCAA regional in Corvallis last year at Oregon State, and I hadn't been up there for a number of years. It had been prior to the pandemic, and it just it renewed my interest in that. I realized how good a fan base they have at Oregon State. I mean, again, they kind of are off the grid because their conference fell apart. They weren't part of the move, but they're a team that's they're top 6, 7, whatever it is now in the poll. So I'll just mention them because that's a team that's easy to forget about because they got
Right.
lost in the conference shuffle. I mean, they're not in the SEC. They're not in the ACC. They're trying to get their own conference together again and kind of reassemble the pack. But they're the one that kind of sticks out. Texas now, Texas is always Texas, but it's been a while since Texas has won a national championship. It's been what 2005, six, whatever it was. It's
I
been
believe
about 20
so.
years. Texas is one of the legendary programs. Maybe it's their year. We'll see.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good team to watch out for. One that definitely surprised me this season. This is kind of team that a little under the radar. Southern Miss. They come in at number 18 this
Hmm.
past week. Definitely a smaller school. They were good last
Yeah.
year. Them in Coastal Carolina kind of carrying the mid-major programs. Do you think teams like that have a chance this year? Obviously, Coastal went to the national championship last year, lost to LSU.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, but won it not too long ago. I mean, Coastal's still one of the great stories, and I
Right.
hope the possibility of a story like that still exists in this
Mhm.
day and age because a lot has changed since Coastal Carolina. And really, it wasn't that long ago, but a lot has changed as far as the landscape of college athletics. But yeah, Southern Miss is great. And, they're pushing, getting close to 30 wins. I love those stories. You want to see those. And unless, if everybody's got their team, but if, a team like Southern Miss, those are always great stories. And I hope that continues because when Coastal Carolina went to Omaha, not only last year what they did and how far they got again, but winning it however many years ago that was when they beat Arizona. So those are great stories. The sport needs that stories. We like at companies like ESPN, we love to tell stories. And
Right.
when a kind of a dark horse comes up and makes a name for themselves, those are always fun.
Right. No, nothing else sells more than a Cinderella run. Like everyone loves
You're
that
right.
underdog story.
Yeah,
Oh,
absolutely, absolutely for
right.
sure.
Well, Mark, of course, we appreciate everything that you've been able to talk about here today. But
Yeah.
before you head out today, there's one question that I ask all my guests. It's a good
Mhm.
would you rather. This is something I've had with many people, and people get pretty defensive and decisive on this one. Do you think
Okay.
do you have a better chance swinging a MLB fastball or returning a serve from a, let's just say, Roger Federer? What do you have a better
Ooh.
chance at?
Wow. Interesting question, Wesley. Well, me at my age now, I mean, I've been in the business. I've worked at ESPN for about a quarter of a century, so I've got a few miles and some gray hairs on me.
Mhm.
I'm going to assume that I'm back at being like a 25
Yeah,
year old
whatever
youngster
age
in the
you feel like
business.
you had the best chance. Yeah.
I would say for me at that point, it would have been trying to hit a fastball because when I was 25. that's a number of years ago now. Most guys weren't throwing 100 or
Right.
even 95. But if you're saying right now in this day and age when guys are throwing, 100 miles per hour, being baseball is the sport that I really played the most and follow it. I would say that because I know what happens. I'm not a big tennis guy, but I know those serves are coming in, far exceeding what even
Right.
the velocity is as a fastball these days. And you can accidentally, if you swing hard and, sometimes you can run into one. And I know the racket's a lot bigger,
Hmm.
but I don't know if I could get it back to the other side of the net. So I would have to
Right.
go with the fastball.
Right. Well, of course, I appreciate it. I would always say baseball, I think, would be a little bit easier to hit. There's only a certain window where the ball can be. I mean, with tennis, you're covering just such a wide, they call it the kitchen, is what it's called. But again, Mark, thanks for coming in. So glad to have you join us. Hopefully, we'll have you back on here in not too long. And you have yourself a great week, Mark.
Love to. Wesley, thanks, man. Enjoyed it very
Of
much.
course. Thank you to Mark for joining the show here today. We're going to move on to our SOS segment of the show. That's my personal favorite, or where I talk about sports on the spectrum. A crazy sports story could be from anywhere in the world about any topic. And this is something the big networks won't cover. That's why I'm here to tell you about today. What we're going to be talking about is cheese rolling. And I hear that and I say, what the heck is cheese rolling? And how is that a sport? And it is. It's a big thing in the UK. And the thing we're going to be talking about today is the Cooper's Hill cheese rolling event in Gloucestershire, England. It takes place in late May on the spring bank holiday. So that'll be late next month. Keep your eyes peeled for that one. The wake, the tradition is estimated to be over hundreds of years old. And they go down Cooper's Hill, which is a very, very steep hill. And like the sport's name, they roll cheese. And here's some of the kind of headlines I want to talk about. I'm going to call it outs, outs, and more outs. To date, nobody has been killed during the event, thankfully. But in 1982, 4 adults and 4 children were struck by lightning. And this isn't metaphorical lightning. This isn't, oh, I got an idea. This is physical lightning in the cheese rolling event. I wonder if the cheese melted. Was it edible at that point? 1992, one of the now grown children snaps his thigh bone in half while tumbling down the hill. Look, I love cheese just as much as the next guy. I actually love cheese too much. It raises my blood level. Like all that stuff. Cheese is so freaking good. Is it worth snapping your thigh bone in half? I would say no. I will go on a dairy-free diet for the rest of my life to keep that one intact for me. And then 1993, 15 people injured, 4 seriously injured. 1997, according to different accounts, up to 37 people were injured, according to 7 spectators. So at this point, it just sounds like people are rolling down a hill for fun, and there's cheese involved. And again, that's going to be our SOS segment of the show. If you have any wild or bizarre sports story you'd like to share, please DM me at the Instagram account, at the TikTok account. You can DM the phone number below. That's going to be right there. If you want to be part of the show and tune in for next week, just let me know. I'm happy to put you guys on here. And then lastly, of course, predictions and projections for the week. In the wake of the NBA playoffs beginning, we've seen round one are begun. Game twos, they started last night. We saw a couple not bizarre games, but a wild finish there. Atlanta is able to down the Knicks. They outscore the Knicks 28-12 in the fourth quarter with a crazy 107-106 win. Bridges with the miss at the buzzer that could have sent the Knicks to a 2-0 lead in the series going to Atlanta later this week. We also saw the Denver Nuggets fall to the Minnesota Timberwolves. That series split at 1-1. That was after the Denver Nuggets. They took a huge lead early in that game, but Minnesota, the tenacity that they showed to stay in that game was incredible. And then obviously first game of the night was kind of the under the radar one. The Cavs take a 2-0 lead in the series over the Toronto Raptors. And predictions for the week, here's what's going to be tonight. You have Boston and Philadelphia. Boston, they won by 32 Sunday morning. That was a noon tip-off game, the biggest in franchise history in an opening game of the playoffs. Jason Tatum looks really almost back to his full self, if not better than he was when he got hurt last season. Jaylen Brown, he's an MVP candidate. Offensively, he's unstoppable. You've seen Neemias Queta has really come on as a center for Boston. Derek White's playing the best defense of his career. You're seeing Sam Hauser, all these other guys. Boston is looking good right now. There's a reason they're the favorites in the East, even though they're not the 1 seed. Give me Boston to roll over Philadelphia by 20 plus today. So if you go pay attention to the money line, put your money on Boston. Put your money especially on Jason Tatum. Especially look if you're someone that likes underdog, you like Prize Picks, one of those. Look at Jason Tatum's double doubles. go up. He gets boards. He can dish the ball out, and he is a scorer, a certified scorer. So, again, so in that game, not just the series, but specifically tonight, I'm going to say Boston over Philadelphia. We have two more games tonight. That's the Portland Trailblazers and the San Antonio Spurs. Congratulations to Victor Wembanyama, the Spurs forward who was announced unanimous first ever defensive player in the year in NBA history. Congratulations to him. Awesome. And then one of the biggest surprises, we got game two. We have the Lakers-Rockets. Nobody expected the Lakers to win that one. I picked the Rockets. I told a coworker, I said, I'm going to go home. I'm going to go to my bank. I'm going to get everything that I own, all my assets, put them in a jar, give it to a bookie, and say, I want the Rockets. And I'm glad I didn't do that because LeBron James showed up and he showed out. The Lakers have come to play, and if they get Luka and AR back at some point in this playoffs, they could be dangerous. So again, that's the 4-5 matchup. The Rockets, give me the Rockets to get their get back right here. KD did not play on Saturday night. That also, I believe, was a big part in what made that game so iffy. So again, give me the Rockets to take game two here to even it up, heading back to Houston. That's the three games for tonight. We're going to look at tomorrow night. This was a surprise round one. Detroit falls to Orlando. They never led in that game. They tied it up a few times, but for the most part, the Magic dominated. They lead 1-0. Quite frankly, I think the Magic go 2-0 right here, going back to Orlando. I think Detroit will eventually win this series in 7, but I think that they're going to need another knockout punch to wake them up, get them up for the games in Orlando. But again, give me the Magic over the Pistons right here. And then OKC and Phoenix. OKC is just so good. You look at this team, and it's hard not to pick them to win the finals. Just top to bottom, their depth, both the first team and the bench is so good. You have very possibly the MVP on that team, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. He can score at will. He can defend anybody. Give me OKC to likely sweep the Suns. And again, that's my predictions for the rest of this round. And that's going to wrap it up for the Holmes Field Advantage podcast. Once again, I'm your host, Wesley Holmes, and thank you for joining. Everyone, y'all have a great week.